And if she should tell you, come closer. It's the time of the season when love runs high.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Glass Gecko. I want to talk today about my favourite band of all time and what I genuinely think is one of the most underrated bands of the 1960s. That, of course, being the Zombies. I'm going to go into a little bit of their history, their sound, lyricism, and what each of the members brought to the band. I'm also going to talk in some detail about why I think it is that the Zombies didn't achieve the same level of success as some of their 60s counterparts. Now, I am only going to be dealing with the iteration of the band which existed from the mid to late 60s. Now, you may think this video is just an excuse for me to fanboy over my favourite band. And in some ways, yes, that is true. But I genuinely think it is an important video to make. When I look on YouTube, modern music journalism in general, this band seems largely forgotten, except for maybe one or two songs. I truly believe this band had a lot to say and a big message to give to the world. And I think I need to make this sort of tribute video to remind people that we should be remembering the Zombies for their success and not what could have been. Rod Argent, Colin Blunstone, Hugh Grundy and Paul Atkinson, later Chris White. These were the five that would make up the band eventually to be known as the Zombies. Now, I'm not going to do too deep of a dive on the history, especially in the early years and the reformations after they split up. I think Pop Goes the 60s has a really great two-parter on the history of the band, and I'd recommend you watch it. I'm going to leave a link to it in the description below. In 1964, the band won a Battle of the Bands. This secured them £250, which in today's money is about $2,500. Not a small sum. It also secured them a record deal with Decca, who you may know as the record company that turned away the Beatles, famously saying guitar bands are on the way out, in 1962. After this success, the Zombies became a full-time band and focused on honing their songwriting abilities. Under producer Ken Jones, the Zombies cut their first song, Summertime. This was a cover of the famous song created by George Gershwin for the opera in 1934. Much like how She Loves You and I Wanna Hold Your Hand are quintessential early Beatles sounds, Summertime and She's Not There very much act in the same way for the Zombies. If you appreciate the uniqueness and the vibe of these songs, then I think you know exactly where this video is going. In 1965, they would release their first full studio album, Begin Here as it's known in the UK. It was a mixture of originally created songs by the band and some tasteful covers. They were later commissioned to write songs for the film Bunny Lake is Missing. However, release after release and single after single would bomb, leading to a loss of confidence and money for the band due to a lack of financial success. This was true in America, but was especially true in the UK. Unhappy with the quality of their recent singles being produced, they turned to CBS Records to start recording their new masterpiece. They took home in EMI Studios and Olympic Studio in London, famously in the same room that Pink Floyd had just recorded their album Piper at the Gates.
So we came back from there with no money, no manager, and Decca had dropped us. So we decided to produce, Rod and I decided to produce ourselves because we weren't happy with the way the recordings were going. We weren't allowed to be in the mix sessions for a start. And he and I were the main writers. So we said we'd like to go and do our own recordings. So a publisher said, CBS will offer you £1,000 and I can get you into Abbey Road. £1,000 is not much for Abbey Road.
Colin said that there was so much left over from bands recording prior that they used these instruments in the recording of their brand new studio album, Odyssey and Oracle.
The summer is here at last. The sky is overcast, and no one brings a rose for Emily.
The album released in April of 1968. Unfortunately, it again did not gain the success that the band had dreamt. It failed to chart in the UK, and it wasn't until Time of the Season got popular in the US that the re-release of the album saw it climb to 95 in the US Billboards. Now, due to a lack of financial success from the album and a lack of demand for gigging, the band had no choice but to split. Now, after the re-release and a bit of later success, the band did reform to record some final songs in the 60s. This was, however, without Colin. The band did reform sometimes and create new iterations of the band since the 60s, but as far as we're concerned for this video, history ends here. In this time, they achieved a decent level of chart success. The first band, after the Beatles, to achieve a #1 on the US charts with She's Not There. Tell Her No was a popular single which reached #6 in US charts, and of course Time of the Season reached #3. Funnily enough, Odyssey and Oracle has been a resurgent album. Every few decades it creeps its way back into the charts. I wish I could find it now, because I remember seeing an interview of the bassist Chris White talking about it. He remembers how his child, when they went to university, the band had started to gain a cult following, especially the album Odyssey and Oracle. So you had these kids on campus talking about this album, and it just sort of blew his mind. And when he told the rest of the band, it blew their minds too. In 2019, the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, marking a much deserved and long needed appreciation for the band. Now, funnily enough, because the band isn't quite as big and successful as the other 60s bands, I can actually use their music pretty liberally in this video without having any risk of the video being taken down. Hopefully by now you're starting to get an idea of what the band sounds like. The band itself describes She's Not There with sophisticated melodies, breathy vocals, choral backup harmonies and jazzy keyboard riffs. The sound of the band is often described as being cool and jazzy, incorporating elements of Baroque pop, which is elements of classical music implanted into pop music. Of course, all of this complemented by Colin's airy vocals. I think this is quite a good description of the band, but it also leaves out some real raw rock and roll talent, and of course their ability to adapt to the trends of the time.
The kind of girl who says to me she doesn't want my love is not the...
I think some of their snappy melodies really outline their pop writing talent. Although they boast a sophisticated style, songs like She Does Everything For Me outlines a raw rock and roll passion from the band. They also knew how to compose short, catchy melodies like the one you're hearing now.
You've known me no more than just a few days, and you think love is so good you want me to stay.
Songs like I Must Move show how they were also adept at writing beautiful flowing melodies with harmonies which portray a very longing, romantic kind of vibe. Many bands were modernising romantic music, but the Zombies had a very unique style in keeping things melodically beautiful and flowing, whilst also advancing the classic rock style.
The butcher, yes, that was my trade, but the king's shilling is now my feet.
Of course, later they perfectly adapted to the psychedelic age, and songs like A Butcher's Tale are so evocative in their lyricism and production that I don't think that many other bands had the same range. This had a lot to do with the individual performances and talents of the band members themselves.
She seems so cold to me, and I remember when I loved her.
Colin's voice is often cited as one of the biggest catalysts for the band's sound. You can hear it very well on songs like I Remember When I Loved Her and Summertime. His voice is almost so breathy and hauntingly beautiful, it adds a very unique vibe to the band. Whether you like it or not, it's undeniable how recognisable it is. Rod's piano playing in pop, jazz and classical inflection adds a huge, and in my opinion, probably the biggest influence on the unique factor to the sound of the band. Piano pieces like that of Brief Candles and Hung Up on a Dream hold no competition amongst their contemporaries, and as far as I'm concerned, he is one of the most prolific songwriters of the 60s. A lot of other contemporary bands at the time had their piano songs, but the Zombies utilised their dedicated keyboard player to add a whole new layer to almost every song, which also had a big part in making up for the fact that they only had one guitarist.
You are far away, counting the days until they set you free again.
Chris White did not just plod along to the root note like some other bassists. If you listen to his bass playing on Friends of Mine, Beechwood Park, and of course She's Not There, it shows that even very early on he had a very adept ear at spotting how to write a melodic bass line. I would argue that at the time he probably gave some of the best bass players of the 60s a run for their money. This was on top of the fact that, other than Rod, he was the other key songwriter in the band. Him and Rod wrote every single song for Odyssey and Oracle, and they both had a huge contribution in writing some of their biggest hits before. I think of Paul almost like the Ringo of guitar players in a way. He was very adept at his guitar solos, like the one you've just heard, and he also was very adept at writing very emotional acoustic pieces too.
I remember joy and pain, the small tears are part of me.
The guitar is never unwanted. It's never too busy, it's never doing too much. Now, sure, this can be said for a lot of 60s bands too, especially at the higher level. But the Zombies only had one dedicated guitar player, and a lot of their songs they only had one guitar track. Yet the guitar on all of their songs never seems to be underwhelming and never seems to be lacking. Hugh added a really important dimension to the band as well. You can really feel his soul come through when he's drumming, and of course all of his parts complemented the songs perfectly. Similar to Chris, he didn't just plod along to a 4/4 beat. You can hear plenty of fills, swings and patterns which give different songs so much character, much like the one you're hearing right now in their most famous song.
I knew her when summer was her crown, and autumn sighed how brown her eyes.
They were choir boys. Well, at least some of them were. And I think harmonies like this really put their contemporaries to shame. Now you can cite Pet Sounds, the Beach Boys in general, Sgt. Pepper's as huge musical influences, and of course that would be correct, but this harmony style is not something I can imagine the others doing. And this is far from the only example of harmony that I could give you, a very important tool in any 60s band's arsenal, and I think the Zombies did it to perfection. Now, in this video I have talked a lot about the comparisons between the Zombies and the Beach Boys, the Zombies and the Beatles. This is actually a topic I want to talk about in a future video because I think it is actually very important to consider when not just looking at 60s music but music in general. I really think that there is a distinct uniqueness about bands like the Zombies. I don't think that we should just push them aside as Beach Boys knockoffs. Yes, they experimented with some psychedelic sounds, much like Sgt. Pepper's and Pet Sounds for example, but does that mean we have to just discredit what they brought to the table as knockoffs as well? I mean, yeah, they used oohs and ahs and la 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 harmonies, the same as the Beatles. Again, does that mean we're just going to write them off as copycats? I mean, they had a guitarist, a bass player, a drummer and a singer. I suppose they were also copying Buddy Holly and the Cricketers. Look, of course I understand how musical influences work, but I genuinely believe that this is one of the cruxes as to why the band did not achieve the same level of success and influence as their contemporary 60s counterparts, constantly being regarded as a Beatles knockoff. Having your genuinely interesting and individual ideas relegated to plagiarism, I think it has a big effect, especially in the way that modern listeners view bands from the past. Not just for the Zombies, but other bands as well. I think we need to respect and recognise that a lot of these bands had a high level of individuality and a lot of very unique ideas that they were trying to put across. And I think this is something that we just cannot forget. This brings me very nicely onto why it is I think the Zombies did not reach the same level of success as their 60s counterparts. Now, the first reason is chart success. Now, chart success doesn't necessarily equate to making good music, but when you're able to consistently chart well over the course of years, chances are you're making music that a lot of people like. The Zombies really were not able to chart nearly close to as well as the biggest acts of the 60s, and this has certainly left a big mark on modern perception of the band. Maybe if you're a big fan of the 60s and you like having a bit of a deep dive every now and then, you will have come across their music, but if you go to your parents, say, who were big fans of the Beatles or the Beach Boys or Bob Dylan, and asked them to name you a few Zombies songs, chances are they're going to say, who are the Zombies? And maybe if you re-jog their memory with time of the season and such, it'll give them a bit of a reminder. But that's the point. Their memory shouldn't need that cardio exercise in the first place. So why then? If I'm stood here giving you a rundown on how great the quality of their music is and how unique and individual they were, why is it they couldn't find a good chart success? Now, coverage on this band, especially in the modern day, is so scarce that I could barely actually find any well-written articles which actually gave a good rundown or reasons as to why. So we're going to have to put our critical thinking caps on and have a little look. Now, one of the main reasons I think is output. The Beatles and the Stones, they were absolutely monsters in this regard. I mean, think about how long it takes the average person to complete any form of artistic project. It takes quite a long time. Now, when you look at music in general, a lot of artists release their albums between years. Some artists release maybe a single or two a year. In the 60s, you had bands releasing albums left, right and centre. I mean, the Monkees still hold the record for the most consecutive #1 albums. Now, yes, that is because the albums were absolute bangers, but it's also because that level of work rate to compile that quality of music is something that is incredibly hard to do. The Zombies released 2 albums, one in 65, one in 68. They released their singles in between, sometimes too few and far between. Sometimes by time releasing, trends had already moved on. Now, of course, it's quality over quantity. Unfortunately for the Zombies, their competition had both. Another issue is their image. Now, they said it themselves, they consider their sound to be sophisticated. Look at them on the screen, they look like accountants, they were choir boys. Were they really as cool and as hip as this guy? Now, this is a big deal. When it comes to music and art in general, a lot of musicians and artists kind of bank themselves on their appearance. It's very important the way that you convey yourself to other people, and I think to the Zombies, they wanted to keep that professional sort of look, which maybe wasn't quite as popular when it came to trying to make it big in pop music. they seemed to care a little less about their image in that regard and more about their music, which was a bit of a shame because it ended up costing them their music career. I mean, making this video, I could barely even find any footage of live performances or interviews during the 60s. I mean, there was nothing quite like Mick Jagger doing aerobic exercises on stage. And of course, the final point being the band actually split up before the album Odyssey and Oracle had gained any sort of traction. So even if new fans found the album, it was quite a surprise to know that the band who made it had already ceased to exist. Now, I know this video may have seemed like an excuse to just rant about a band that I love because none of my friends cared to listen. And as I say, yes, that would be correct. At least that's how it started. But I genuinely did want to get my views across as to why I think this band deserves a lot more recognition for the art that they put forward and why they never got it. Yes, they were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yes, they achieved some chart success, and yes, they have a little bit of a cult following. But out of all the bands that are remembered by many as just sort of a one or two hit wonder, I think that this band might be the most undeserving of that title. You can tell from their sound and their lyrics that they had so much that they wanted to convey to the world, but the world decided it would only partially listen. I think this is a sentiment that can be retold for many a band, maybe even your favourite band, but I suppose sometimes that's just the way it goes. I can at least appreciate living in a time when I can just look up live performances, interviews, spread my message online, and I certainly appreciate the music that they gave us. I want to end on a bit of a soppy note. Maybe it's not important to you, but it certainly is important to me. You see, a lot of bands get into arguments. They end up hating each other, getting in each other's way. They can't stand being around each other. End up being abusers, serial cheaters, lousy husbands and wives, lousy people in general. It's a miracle that some bands even made it to be a year old. You see, the Zombies were friends. The only argument I could really find was during the recording of Time of the Season. Colin wasn't a big fan of this song, and he wasn't happy with the way he had to sing it. Him and Rod had a bit of a back and forth. But at the end of the day, Colin said, okay, fine, I'll do it, and he recorded it. The rest is history. It ended up being their most famous song. You see, the band didn't split up because they hated each other. They couldn't stand being around each other. They split up because of financial problems. It was that simple. They all got married to their first wives and have been married since. All except for Paul and Colin. Colin's first wife was trying to drain him of all his money because of the success he had. Well, he found someone else, and guess what? They've been together for over 40 years too. And when you look at their induction speech into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, you can really tell how appreciative these guys are of their family and their friends, the people who helped them along the way. I don't have to separate the art from the artist. These were just really great stand-up guys with a huge amount of talent, and I think that's something that we can all appreciate. So I am editing the video at the moment, but if you've made it this far, I want to thank you so much for watching. The videos I've done in the past have been very sort of low effort joke videos, but this is sort of more what I want to do with this channel. So if you have any genuine feedback, I would genuinely love to hear it in the comment section and such. I mean, I'm kind of surprised my channel has got as many subscribers as it has got over a few stupid jokes. So I also just want to thank people who have subscribed already. But yeah, as I say, if you made it this far, it certainly means a lot to me. Thank you very much for watching.